Well, I got a problem. And that problem is COVID. No, I don't have COVID. I mean, I don't think so. Who can tell anymore? But COVID's causing a big problem. Actually, it's not causing a problem for me. It's causing a problem for Pitt. So Pitt has a COVID problem. And no, COVID's not running through the program. What COVID has done, though, is have a pretty serious impact on the roster. In a lot of ways. There's a lot of ways that COVID and the fallouts from, the fallout from that year and a half or however long we want to say it lasted, there's always lasting impacts. But there's one thing I don't think we've talked about a whole lot. I've been thinking about it, but it seems like it's relevant to discuss because I think we're seeing the impact and the effects this season. We're going to keep seeing them for another couple of years of what that year, that 2020 calendar year, really did to the short and maybe long-term future of college athletic programs and Pitt football among them. So we're going to break it down today on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, that was kind of a long-winded open, a long-winded cold open, as they say, but I didn't want to get right to the point just yet. I wanted to kind of hook you in, so you say, why is this weirdo talking about COVID today? But I have a good reason for it, and it is relevant to the current team. I think it might have some impact on the team's performance and kind of how they're doing and where they're at, and we'll get into all of that today on the Morning Pitt. Of course, you know the deal here. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, our YouTube channel with all of our exclusive Pitt video content, these Morning Pitt videos Monday through Friday. The weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night, like we did last night here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m., me and Jim Hammett talk about some Pitt sports. We have our post-game show that we do after every game. During the fall, we'll have our post-game show after the Louisville game on Saturday. Hopefully sometime before midnight we'll get started, but we'll see exactly when we get back to the Panther-Lair studios after the game. We'll go from there. And then, we have interviews, highlights, press conferences, post-game, all those kinds of things right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe so you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. And then, of course, the website Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the best source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends. All day, every day, Panther-Lair.com. The message boards are humming, of course, because that's what's always happening. I would like to say it's tied to the 1-4 start, but the reality is the message boards are always humming. People are always talking about Pitt sports at Panther-Lair.com, and right now is certainly no exception. So my thing today, and why I'm bringing up COVID, is because, we know how weird and screwed up 2020 was, right? Right from the start. We all have these sort of touchstone moments and memories that come up. I can remember, the last concert I went to before COVID took over. You know what I mean? It was at the Peterson Event Center, as a matter of fact. And it was right before, and to the point where you felt weird about shaking people's hands down there. I remember Pitt starting spring camp. And there was a question of, and they this was one of the years where their schedule in spring camp was they do a week of camp, and then they had a week for spring break, for Pitt spring break, and then they would come back and do the rest of spring camp. And they were off on spring break when, for lack of a better word, everything broke. And they ultimately decided, Pitt, the university, didn't bring anybody back. The football program, I think then after that, decided not to bring all their players back to complete spring camp. Spring camp was canceled and, move on. And we all remember those moments, and we all have things that sort of define what that year was like, particularly from like March through December. Really, like March through Christmas, and maybe even into January 21. I think we all remember certain things about that period. I'm sure you have some memories that really stand out that are very vivid of that time. And not the least of which is the empty stadiums. Covering games in those empty stadiums, not being able to, being in the press box, but not being able to go to the post-game press conference. So we're all on Zoom in the press box, all on our laptops. All these things, and again, in an empty stadium, they're all very vivid memories that I'm sure everyone has from that time period. But one of the things that was most notable, and probably doesn't get talked about a lot, and I would think around right now, 2023, is when we would start having more of these conversations, or would get discussed. I'm sure The Athletic will write about it in the next year or two of, kind of breaking down what really happened here. I could see somebody like Bruce Feldman digging into this story. But if you recall, at the height of COVID, not even the height of COVID, during that year, the NCAA shut down all recruiting visits. Shut them down. And it was basically, I was just looking this over. Pitt had some guys come to that first week of spring camp, March 4th, March 6th, somewhere, I think that was the Tuesday, Thursday, somewhere around there. But then once everything sort of shut down the following week, the NCAA shut down in-person recruiting visits. And everything had to be over Zoom. Everything had to be, over the phone and FaceTime and DMs and text messages and all that. There couldn't be any in-person visits. Recruits couldn't come to campus. Coaches couldn't go out and visit the kids. And they couldn't go visit the high schools. And they couldn't go do evaluations. And they couldn't do all these things. The recruiting process became one that was done entirely electronically. There was nothing in person about the recruiting process. And at the time, I remember, we covered it. We talked about it. We reported on it and followed it and talked about how kids were committing to schools that they had never visited, and coaches were signing classes with kids that they've never met in person. Not the whole class, but a significant number that they've never met in person. And it was crazy then, because you just don't recruit like that. So much of the recruiting process is building those relationships and getting to know each other and finding out who you can mesh with, who you can play for and who can play for you, who you can coach and who can be coached by you. And that year, because of the NCAA's extended dead period, emergency dead period, or whatever we called it, I don't think it ended until the following June, actually. I forget if there were even unofficial visits in the spring. I have to go back and look at that. But because of that, you ended up with this totally different kind of recruiting class, the recruiting class of 2021. And I want to talk about that class today. All right, a class that is inextricably linked to COVID and inextricably linked to the pandemic and the impact on recruiting in the NCAA's change in the recruiting calendar, or emergency dead period, as it were. And I bring this up. It was brought up to me. I've been thinking about it for a while. Somebody just mentioned it to me yesterday, actually. Said, that 2021 class, that recruiting class of 2021. And we started going back and forth. And I was like, you know what? Actually, that's something worth talking about. Just as a little bit of a aside from the talk about Louisville and the 1-4 start, although it's tied into all of those things. And the reason it's relevant right now is those players, the players who signed in the recruiting class of 2021, are now in their third year. And the third year, I think, is an important year. You never entirely give up on guys. Some guys could pan out in their fourth or fifth year and really kind of step up and have that big breakout season. We've seen it happen. It doesn't happen all the time, but we've seen it happen. Guys step up in their fourth or fifth year and have a big season and really kind of grow into their roles. But a lot, for the most part, when guys are in their third season, you have certain expectations of what they're going to contribute and what they're going to produce. We always used to talk about the 3-year rule, the 3-year out rule. Back when recruiting was normal, back before there were super seniors and you kind of got jammed up that way. Typically, the rule of thumb, and if you've read Panther-Lair.com for any period of time, this was the case. And I think it's probably shifted a little bit over the years, but generally it's the same idea here. The rule of thumb is that you recruit sort of 3 years out. So you look at your roster now, you look at the junior class, the guys who are juniors, and those are the guys you're recruiting to replace with your current recruiting class. You're not looking at, oh man, they need a new starting wide receiver. You're not going to recruit for that. Or like, they really need help at left tackle. Well, you needed to recruit next season's left tackle 2 years ago. You're not going to go out and they got to get a left tackle in this class because they need somebody for next year. If that's what you're doing, if you're recruiting the current high school seniors to step into your starting lineup next year, you've screwed up along the way. Ideally, what you're looking to do is replace guys 3 years out so that those guys who are currently juniors, you recruit the high school kids now, or redshirt sophomores, you recruit the high school kids now to come in, and in 3 years, when that group cycles out, when those current third-year players cycle out, the current class of high school kids, the recruits you're bringing in, will be ready to step into. They'll be in their third years and they're ready to step into a starting job in a primary role. It's a 3 years out rule. And by that rule, by that concept, The kids in the 2021 recruiting class are in their third years and should be contributing and should be playing a lot and should be significant players. I mean, they should be starters. That should fill up a pretty good, sizable portion of your starting lineup and your two deep. I don't think you need to. I don't think you have to guess on where this is going, because the class of 2021 to this point has been almost an entire washout. Not 100%. There's some very good players in this class. We'll talk about it in a second, but it has almost entirely washed out. And like I said, there's a handful of guys who have been really good that we would call definite hits, but there's a whole bunch who are gone and a whole bunch more who are TBDs with maybe a strong lean toward misses. If you were to break the class down in that way. 23 players in that recruiting class, 2021 recruiting class. It included, let's start with the hits. Let's start with the good things, all right? Gavin Bartholomew, big one right there, right? Rodney Hammond, yeah, doing good, looking good. I can remember Rodney Hammond committing during the 2019 Georgia Tech game. I was in Atlanta. I think I was walking to or from the College Football Hall of Fame, and I get a text that Rodney Hammond's committing. That's a good one. Javon McIntyre in that class started every game this season. Looks like he's going to be a good player, I think. And I think he's played well this year. And I think he'll keep getting better, as safeties are wont to do in this defense. And he's got a couple more years left. I think you could be looking at a multi-year starter at safety in this defense, which is a huge bonus. I talked about that yesterday, about the development of those safeties. PJ O'Brien was in that class, in and out of the starting lineup this year, still getting a rotational role. I would consider him he's a two deep player. That's what you're looking for right now, is two deep guys. Who's going to be, either starting or a top backup who's going to rotate in. And man, that 2021 class, yeah, man, they got Gavin Bartholomew, they got Rodney Hammond, they got Javon McIntyre, they got PJ O'Brien. We're running out of names real fast. Terrence Moore is a starter now. Terrence Moore was in the 2021 class, and he's a starter. He, after stepping in for Jake Cradle, I think, Dave Borbely likes what he's seen, and potentially, Moore could be a starter down the road, for the foreseeable future. You could be a multi-year starter at center there. So that's pretty good. That's about 5 guys we're talking about out of 23. And the rest of this list, you don't want to hear it. You really don't. Let's stick with somewhat positive, all right? Because there's Nate Yarnell. Yeah, could. We'll see. He's 1-0 as a starter, right? Potentially could end up as the starter this year if Christian Baer flames out. There's Terrence Moore, who I mentioned. He's a starter. Maybe I should even put him in the hits category. He's a guy who's he's starting, right? Terrence Enos, he's a backup right tackle right now, so we'll see what comes out of that. Trey Anderson is he might be like the third team center, depending on where you put Jake Cradle when he comes back. Elliot Donald saw more snaps at Virginia Tech, so that maybe is trending in the right direction. Hasn't really produced anything. Dorian Ford moved from the defensive line to the offensive line. Nikai Johnson, one of those guys who's in the mix to emerge as the fourth defensive end, hasn't really done it yet. Noah Bigelow can't really get on the field. He's getting blocked a little bit by senior corners, but as Randy Bates said on Tuesday it was, if one of those guys like a Bigelow or Tamarian Crumpley, who's also in this recruiting class, if those guys were ready, they would be in the rotation, but they're not. And so they go with the 3 guys, the 3 seniors. Stephon Hall, I'm going to put as a TBD. I think, he's on the 2 deep at safety. I think the coaches talked him up quite a bit, over the course of the spring. And I thought he would actually rotate in more than he has at safety, but I think he's still got a chance to be a good player. Jake Renda, seems like he's either a big receiver or an undersized tight end. You take your pick, but he's not really making an impact at either one of those spots. And then we get to this group. And you don't really, you don't want to hear most of these names. Jaden Bradley was in the 2021 class. He's at Charlotte now and not playing. Miles Alston was in the 2021 class. He's at ODU, Old Dominion, and he's not playing. Malik Newton was medically disqualified. He went to West Virginia State. I'm not sure where he is now. I don't see him on any 2023 roster. He might have transferred someone else. Naquan Brown transferred to Norfolk State, and I don't think he's on the roster there anymore either. Khalil Anderson transferred to East Tennessee State, where he has finally cracked into the rotation. He's getting some snaps in recent games. Preston Levant was a linebacker from Georgia, the only linebacker in the class. He went into the transfer portal last spring of 22, I think it was. No idea where he ended up. I mean, even like his social media doesn't really indicate it. Kyle Fugetti, remember that guy? He requested a release from his letter of intent, and then ultimately, it seems, retired from football. Cole Mitchell, I mean, it's probably not fair to put Cole Mitchell on this list. I mean, Cole Mitchell is going to be one of those guys that'll be a great trivia name for you to bring up down the road. If you recall this guy, in 2021, June of 2021, when recruiting opened up again and the NCAA removed the emergency dead period and they could have prospect camps again, Cole Mitchell came out and impressed. And he was originally in the class of 2021. He reclassified to 2022 because he wasn't getting any offers. He came out and had a really good camp. The coaches said, we really like you. You want to join the team right now? And so he took an official visit and committed and reclassified back to the 2021 class and joined the team. He's still on the roster. I mean, I guess it's not really fair to put him on the miss list when he's still on the roster as opposed to a TBD, like a guy like a Trey Anderson or a Tanner Tinos, or Noah Bigelow, some of these guys who just haven't seen the field yet. But it sort of feels like Cole Mitchell's probably not going to work into that rotation. I mean, I don't want to entirely write him off, but it feels like a guy like Enos is probably closer, or Bigelow is probably closer than a Mitchell at this point. No matter how you want to slice it, that's a big part of the class. And when we're only talking about 4 or 5 being confirmed hits in the class out of a class of 23 in their third year. I'm all for, not writing a guy off after his first year, not writing a guy off after his second year, but in the third year, when we're halfway through the season of the third year for these guys, and we're still not seeing a significant impact from a whole bunch of them, like 18 out of 23, that's a problem. That's a problem. It really is. And in some of these cases, some of these guys were blocked. There were 5 offensive linemen in that recruiting class. 5, right? Fugetti, Moore, Enos, Anderson, and I guess you could add Elliot Donald, depending on, we'll get back to Elliot Donald actually. So 4 offensive linemen in that recruiting class, and you've got Moore in the starting lineup and Enos at as a backup right tackle, but both of those are kind of a result of injuries. So those guys, would assume they would not be in that role if not for the injuries to Jake Cradle and Mac Gonsalves, and probably ultimately to some extent Ryan Jacoby. And so you're really not getting it. Those guys were, some of the offensive linemen were blocked to some extent by the guys who came back as super seniors, but when it comes down to it, they're just not playing their way into it. The defensive line is a big problem right now. And I think I'm more concerned about Pitt's defensive line for the short and long term after thinking about this class than I was before I really started digging into it. This recruiting class was supposed to be the one that reloaded the defensive line. Nakai Johnson, Elliot Donald, Naquan Brown, and Dorian Ford. That was supposed to be the one. It was. You knew that time was coming up, but within 3 years, those guys were going to be leading the charge and replacing Haba Baldonado and Kalijah Cansey and all these guys, whether they came back or not. These were going to be. This was the next wave. Not one of them has a sack. One of the 2 of the guys aren't even with Pitt's defensive line anymore. One guy moved to the offensive line. One guy transferred out. And then the other 2, Donald and Johnson, just aren't making an impact. These were, and again, I don't want to write guys off. I'm all for guys taking different amounts of time to progress and to develop and to get there and make an impact. But these are 4-star guys. These are top recruits, top prospects. And you do have a certain level of expectation with a recruit of that caliber that they're going to come in and make an impact sooner rather than later. Maybe not as a true freshman. I don't expect these guys to come in and start on the defensive line at Pitt as true freshmen, but by their third year, they should be doing more than they are. They should be making a bigger impact than they are, and it's just not happening. And that doesn't mean it can't happen over the next 2 years. And it's only 2 years because these guys don't have the COVID year. These guys don't get to be super seniors, so they only have 2 seasons left after this. But to this point, they've done nothing. I mean, literally nothing. And that's a huge problem when we look at the issues this team has. You can tie a bunch of them to this class. Jaden Bradley and Miles Alston, that's 2 wide receivers. And this team has, the receiving core is made up of transfers, right? Bub Means, Kanate Mumfield, Dejon Reynolds. It's transfers and freshmen. There's a giant gaping hole in the middle of the receiver roster, and it's because Jaden Bradley and Miles Alston flamed out and transferred. And it's from that 2021 recruiting class. Now, guys like Bradley and Alston did take unofficial visits. When you go down the list, I think 15 out of the 23 guys in this class did visit at some point where they actually had in-person interaction with the coaches. The only one who took an official visit was Cole Mitchell, who took his official visit like 2 months, or actually probably like a couple of weeks before he enrolled in the summer of 2021. But nobody else took an official visit, and 8 of the guys in this class never took an unofficial visit. I can remember the story about Khalil Anderson driving up here on his own, just driving around campus in like November of 2000, or maybe the summer of 2020, whenever it was. And these guys, they didn't have visits, and I don't think you can overlook the impact of that and the significance of it, and how that changes the recruiting process when you can't have that in-person interaction, when you can't coach these guys at camps, you can't spend time with them on an official visit, you can't be around them and their families and really get to know them and find out how they would fit. And for the recruits too, a guy like Preston Levon or Kyle Fugetti or Khalil Anderson who never got a chance to take a visit, they didn't have an opportunity to come here, to be here, to see what it's like, to see how they fit, to see how they mesh with the coaches and mesh with the environment and mesh with everything around the program. It's a recipe for disaster in recruiting terms. It really is. And I think if you look around the country, I bet you'll find that a lot of 2021 recruiting classes are experiencing the same level of, I don't want to say failure, it seems like a harsh term, but not success. It's not success. Not when you're in the third year of this class and there's only 4, maybe 5 guys you can point to and say, yeah, they're really helping the team right now. And again, we're not going to write these guys off. In the next 2 years, they could pan out, but it doesn't look good right now. It's a bit concerning. And it's a problem everybody faced. It's not unique to Pitt, and it's not really the fault of Pitt. They took who they could took. They took who they wanted to take or who they thought they wanted to take, just while missing a giant chunk of the recruiting process. All right, we got our mailbag tomorrow, so we got that to look forward to as always. I'm sure we'll talk a lot of Louisville, we'll talk a lot of quarterback, we'll talk a lot of Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, anything else on your mind in tomorrow's mailbag edition of the Morning Pitt. So thanks for tuning in today. I'm glad we made it almost to the end of the week. We only got one more day, folks, so enjoy your Thursday. Hope you've had a good one. Like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you tomorrow on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.